Tracy Martin.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker. Thank you. I rise on behalf of New Zealand First to speak in support of the Arts Council of New Zealand bill. I'm a little mystified by the speaker before me. I'm not quite sure whereabouts in the bill is the finance part, but I'm hoping perhaps that's part 2 that's coming, or part 3 or part 4, because the bill that I read actually didn't really relate to what that speaker was talking about. But never mind, we'll get back to the bill in question. So the purpose of this bill, for the last speaker, is to streamline the governance structure of the Arts Council of New Zealand, otherwise known as Creative New Zealand. So we all know that. It's to take 4 governing bodies and reduce these down to 1. It's to take a total of 28 appointed members down to 13, and this new entity is going to be called the Arts Council. Now, we're pleased to see in the provision of this bill the allocation of 4 seats for specialists in the area of tikanga Māori and Māori arts, and 2 seats for those with the knowledge of the traditions, cultures and arts of Pacifica. We do share some of the concerns of the Labour Party and the Green Party that this could result in the loss of a distinctive Māori or Pacifica identity, but see that this could be preferable to the continuation of 2 separate entities and the resources required to support them. Now, at this point, I'd like to make the statement that New Zealand First was not here for the first reading, nor were we on the Select Committee for the submissions. So during the period between readings, New Zealand First will be taking that opportunity to go and talk to our arts communities, to our Māori, our Pacifica, and all the other members of our communities that actually input into the arts in our various communities. But we do have confidence that any Māori and Pacifica appointees will continue to consult with their broader communities through hui and whono, but we stress that there will be a need to identify and to resource their ability to do this inside any funding model that the new Arts Council receives. So perhaps some of the savings around less entities, less people, will be funnelled into that facility so that there can be greater consultation from that period. I think it is a great shame that the Minister who brought this bill to the House doesn't think strategic planning is valuable. Now, that's what we have a concern around the removal of the requirement to produce and to consult on a strategic plan. The reason given for this removal, apart from the interesting reasons that the Minister gave today, like they're too much trouble and you have to keep doing that consultation all the time, is that under the Crown Entities Act in 2004, the Arts Council is required to produce a statement of intent. Now, why do we feel concerned about this? That's because a statement of intent is about what you intend to do now, in the here, in the present. Whereas it outlines how the entity intends to interact with other entities, corporates or stakeholders. It outlines the method with which it's going to do business, by which it will achieve its goals. But again, that's very much in the present, in the here and now. The purpose of a strategic plan is to provide organisational direction. And I've got to say, it might be new to the government benches, that facet of a strategic plan. It's about having some vision. It's actually about reaching out for, let us say, some aspirational goals and creating those aspirational goals through consultation with communities. So this process, the process of creating a strategic plan, draws all parties together and sets them all working towards a common goal. We note that the Minister said in his address during the first reading that stakeholders can expect consultation through the annual letter of expectation. And I would argue that this still does not provide long-term vision or the corporate sense of direction that would be created from a 3 to 5 year strategic plan. If the Minister doesn't like the fact he has to do it every 3 years, make it a 5-year strategic plan. That's fine, but have some vision and have some consultation around that vision. I want to draw the House's attention to Part 1, Clause 2, Part D2, which recognises and upholds the principles of access. And I quote, "By supporting the availability of projects of merit to communities or sections of the population that would otherwise not have access to them." We want to make a special comment around the area of youth access to and the participation of the arts. Sir, in Rodney, Helensville and the southern end of the Northland electorates, we have no public transport. Now, this is something that those that argue against roads tend to forget. Many of us do not have the luxury of stepping outside our front door and a few paces down the street to a bus stop. Nor do we live on a curbed and channelled street where we can ride our bikes over smooth, sealed roads in relative safety. Many of our cyclists take their lives in their hands on our narrow, unsealed or unedged country roads. My point here is that the continuation of Creative New Zealand funding for projects such as Tutus on Tour, who performed in Warkworth and Welsford late last year, providing for many of our children and youth the first and only opportunity to see ballet of such a high standard, is vital. Or the dance groups that come to our schools and take a day of dance and movement classes for hundreds of students. Or supporting events such as later this year where the youth orchestra will play in the Helensville Community Centre. Without this funding and the commitment to send the arts out, so to speak, our young people would often never have the opportunity to see what is possible. So New Zealand First strongly supports the principles espoused in this clause, the clause around access. If we move on to Part 2, community arts providers, we note that in the first reading of this bill, the Honourable Member Grant Robinson drew attention to some of the concerns from parts of the community-based arts sector about the models moving from the model of the funding of the arts or the decision about the arts would move to a more city or urban-centric decision-making base. And again, coming from the Rodney electorate, which only just 20 months ago found themselves dragged kicking and screaming into the amalgamation of Auckland, this is a situation that on many levels we have ample experience advocating against. And it is interesting to note that the arts funding has been one of the areas where Rodney has had to brace itself against the onslaught of the large urban populations to retain its decision-making powers. I was pleased to be part of the process in which local artists submitted projects for funding support under the legacy partnership between the now extinct Rodney District Council and Creative New Zealand, but saddened that due to the grave danger of having funds withdrawn from our local area for allocation over the wider Auckland, with the decisions on that distribution being made in the Auckland Town Hall, that the Rodney Local Board was required to abandon the policy of core funding retention and interest allocation, thereby losing the security of the future of this funding pool. But to every cloud, there must be a silver lining. And in this instance, the Legacy Rodney District will gain some substantial art pieces and projects developed and delivered by a variety of local artists containing that local feel and flavour that this fund has as one of its core deliverables. The point we wish to make, however, is that we need to safeguard the local input into art decisions delivered at a local level, and we would advocate that Clause 14 should be amended to read that the Arts Council will designate community arts providers, and that this sentiment permeate through not only this section of the bill, but also Clauses 15, 16 and 18. I'm not suggesting the specifics around numbers of the community providers or that dictate the criteria of those community providers, because that would drop out of a strategic plan. That's the sort of thing you work on in a strategic plan. But by changing this wording, the Arts Council would be committed to addressing local delivery via local communities. I could give you a few examples, sir, but I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip to the end of my comment today. We're unhappy about the removal of the word local. It's interesting how many people are having a conversation these days in procurement policies or other policies about what local means. But again, in a strategic plan, that would probably drop out. In closing, sir, New Zealand First sees more positives than negatives in this bill, and we will be supporting it to third reading. But we signal at this time our intention to introduce a supplementary order paper addressing the areas where we believe this bill can be improved. Thank you.
Melissa Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a great pleasure to rise to take a short